Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining my session. Today I'm going to talk to you about building data integration services in real time with AWS. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about some of the services that you can use, as well as the real use cases that we've seen when working with customers. I'll also take you through a specific architecture and demo later in the presentation. So let's get started. What we're seeing today is the trends with data is that it's growing exponentially. There's a lot more data for people to think about, and the data is a lot more diverse. It's not just structured data coming through, but there's semi-structured and unstructured data. It's growing at a rate of 10 times every 5 years, and that data needs to live a lot longer in an organization than it used to. The other thing we're also seeing is that there's more people who need to access that data. There's more roles, newer roles that have come up in the last few years. Data scientists, even applications need to consume data. And there's a lot more use cases that are coming about as a result of this exponential growth in data, including things like machine learning and scientific data analysis. So what are some of the use cases that we're seeing? So some of the real use cases that we're seeing includes things like hydrating a data lake. So if you've established a data lake, wanting to hydrate that data lake is really important. So wanting to do that in real time is even more important. Other data replication use cases we've seen, including disaster recovery and dev and test, or even transitioning from a batch analytics to real-time analytics is also another use case. The other use case we've also seen whilst talking to customers includes bidirectional data flows. So moving data from one SaaS application to another SaaS application. And there's probably many more that you can think of right now, but these are the ones that I'm thinking about immediately. So some of the services that you can use for data integration. The first one I want to talk about is Amazon AppFlow. Amazon AppFlow allows you to create data flows between SaaS applications and AWS services. So there's no coding required. You don't need to build custom integration services for these particular SaaS applications. It comes with data encryption, and you have the option to transform your data using these data flows in AppFlow. You can also schedule these flows to work on demand on a schedule or in real time, which is what I'm going to show you later on. These are some of the applications, SaaS applications that AppFlow is integrated with, and there's more coming, but these are some of the immediate ones that we have available within AppFlow right now. Another service I want to talk to you about is AWS Database Migration Service, and it's often not thought about as a service to be used for real-time data integration. And it's more commonly used for migrating databases from homogeneous database migrations or heterogeneous database migrations, but it's also available to be used for continuous data replication. It's low cost and it's really simple to use. So it has a simple UI that you can use. There's no installing of infrastructure. You don't need any drivers. You're purely using a replication instance, source and a target to be able to use database migration service. And it's also reliable, so you can use it in highly available architectures, and it has a self-healing part of the service that allows it to self-heal if there's a problem. Another service that's commonly used for real-time in AWS is Amazon Kinesis. So Amazon Kinesis is one of the main services we talk about when it comes to real-time data streaming. And essentially that's because you can use Kinesis for moving data in quick time from one service to another. So you're using Kinesis to form a data stream, to move data from a consumer to another service. For example, from web clicks to, say, Amazon S3, which is what I'm going to show you later on in the demonstration. But it's also it can also leverage other AWS services like AWS Lambda and Amazon Redshift. It's also quite easy to use, and it's a fully managed service. AWS Glue is a serverless analytics service that can help you also in real-time use cases. So it has a couple of components. It has the ability to crawl your data and create data catalogs. So it can also automatically infer schemas and populate a data catalog based on data that's stored in S3. It is serverless, so it produces and performs serverless ETL processes for you, so you can build workflows and execute jobs within Glue. And it also can orchestrate workflows for you. So it can orchestrate triggers, crawlers, and jobs, and it can automate a lot of that ETL pipeline for you. I'm now going to talk to you about the brief architecture that I'm going to walk through, and then I will show you a demo of what that looks like. So in this particular architecture, I'm using a Salesforce account, and I'm bringing data using AppFlow into AWS. I'm also going to include in this particular architecture a source database using DNS. I'm going to bring some data in to AWS, and then I'm also going to demonstrate some web clicks, so just randomly generated web clicks and data, and I'm going to use Amazon Kinesis Data Firehose to bring that data into AWS. All that data is going to be consolidated into an Amazon S3 bucket. And then from there, I'm going to use AWS Glue to crawl the data and create a data catalog. And the last thing I'm going to do is use Amazon Athena to query that data in real time using the catalog that Glue created. So having the data within Amazon S3 and querying that data in real time. So let's go ahead and look at the demo.
The first thing I've done here is log into the AWS console. As you can see, I'm in the North Virginia region, and the first service I'm going to look at is Amazon AppFlow. So this is the first screen you'll see in Amazon AppFlow. This service is used to integrate data from a number of different SaaS applications that you might be running. From this page, you could create a new flow or view flows. I'm going to view some flows that I've already created from earlier. The first flow I'm going to look at is a flow that I created that's going to bring in contact data from Salesforce, and I'm going to land that in Amazon S3. That contact flow is triggered on demand, so I'm going to run that. But let's have a look at it to begin with. So when I go into this flow, as you can see, it has an active status, it's triggered on demand. It has a connection to Salesforce that I've already established, and I have a destination bucket that the information will be loaded into. The flow is encrypted by default using AWS KMS, and it's a managed key. You could also opt to use your own keys. I've mapped a number of fields that exist in Salesforce to a destination which will become a file in Amazon S3. And if you have a look, I've run that flow a couple of times already, and I'm going to trigger that flow to run again. So while that's running, I'm going to now go and create another flow. And this time I'm going to bring in contact events. So that would be changes to any contacts that happen in Salesforce. So I'm going to give it a description. Salesforce contact events. As I mentioned, the flow is encrypted by default, but you can choose to use your own keys if you wanted to use your own keys. You can optionally add some tags here for the flow. For example, you might enter a flow that is for a cost center if you are using some billing data to bill the cost of this flow to another cost center. That's an example. Or maybe you wanted to understand the environment that this flow is used for. It might be a production or a demonstration or a UAT environment. The source will be Salesforce. Now, I've already established a connection to Salesforce. If you haven't done this before, you'd need to establish a connection to Salesforce, and you can do that by creating a new connection and entering the login details for your Salesforce account. That gives you the correct permissions to log into that account. So you would have to specify the name. I'm going to use an existing connection I've already established. So Salesforce has objects and events. The first flow that I created was a contacts object. This time I'm going to look for Salesforce events, and I'm going to look for contacts and contact change events. My destination will be Amazon S3, an existing bucket, and I will prefix the bucket with a Salesforce so that I know that this information is from Salesforce. You've got a couple of additional settings you can do here. You can aggregate records into one file. I'm going to add a timestamp to the file name, and I'm also going to place the file in a timestamped folder. And I'm going to select daily to make it easier. For the flow triggers, for the object flow triggers, you can use run on demand or run on a schedule. So the shortest schedule you can run is 1 minute. But for an event flow, it will run on the flow will run as a result of an event happening within Salesforce. And I'll show you how that works. This is where the real-time aspect comes into it. So you can optionally map fields, or you can use a CSV file to map the fields. I'm going to just map them manually, and I'm going to select all the fields because I don't know which fields are changing in the context. I can't add a filter because it's a event flow. I'm going to check all my options and then create that flow. I also need to activate the flow. So once you've created it, you then need to activate it because it's in a draft status, and you need to activate that flow to make that active. So in order to demonstrate that flow actually working, I'm going to go over to Salesforce into the contacts, and I'm going to make some changes here. So I'm going to make some changes to the email address of a couple of records, just to show you what the flow will actually do. This should actually trigger the flow to run as a result of these changes that I'm making to this Salesforce entries. So if we go back to app flow, we should actually see this event flow trigger. As you can see here, the event flow is now triggered because of those changes I made in Salesforce. And this is the real-time aspect of this event flow, where it's now processing the records, those 3 changes that I made, and it's pushing that data directly into S3. So you can see that's successfully completed. If we check the other flow as well, we should see that that successfully ran. Checking the run history, we processed it, and we have an additional record. So if we go into S3 now, and I refresh that bucket, I should now see a Salesforce folder. Great. And I see 2 subfolders under that, where one is related to the contacts data that I ran on demand for that flow. So you can see a file here has landed in S3. And the other folder that we have now is the event data. So I should, in theory, see 3 files processed in. Yes, I do. So if we check one of those files and just have a look at what that looks like. Let's have a look at this file. As you can see here, you can see a bunch of fields that it's told me has actually changed. So you can tell that it's telling me that the entity name contact was changed, the change type was an update, and that the email address was what was amended, and the last modified date gives me the last modified date. So that's really excellent information that we do often need when things are happening in our different applications. And that's AppFlow. The next service I want to look at is AWS Database Migration Service, and this service is often overlooked as a means to bring real-time data into S3, a data lake, or something like that. It's almost often used as a way to migrate databases, maybe from the same database to another database, or from one database to a different database type. But you can actually use DMS as a service to be able to do ongoing replication of data that's been changed in a database to, say, your data lake. So when you come into the service, this is the front screen that you'll see, and there's a couple of important parts to DMS. Firstly, we have things called endpoints. Now, in this case, I have an RDS endpoint, which is a source database that I'm going to use for this demo. And I'm going to create two additional endpoints, which will be target endpoints that will go into the existing S3 bucket that I've created. I also have a replication instance. So to use DMS, you need to have a replication instance, and that replication instance is what is used to replicate the data from the source to a target. And I've already created that already. And then in order to make the replication happen, you have database migration tasks. So I'm going to start by creating two additional endpoints. The first one will be the first S3 endpoint. I'll call it S3 raw target, so I know it's the raw data from the database, just a full load of the database. I need an IAM role to be able to run this task, which gives DMS access to S3. And I need the bucket name. So I'm going to use the existing bucket that I've already created, and I'm in this folder. It will be, I will prefix the folder with a path for tickets. I also want to bring in some additional attributes because I want the column names to be brought into the file, and then I'm going to test the connection endpoint. It runs in a VPC, so I'll use the VPC and the replication instance to test connection to the S3 endpoint. As you can see, that test was successful, which I'm now going to create that endpoint. I'm going to go ahead and create another endpoint now. I've now created another endpoint for change data capture. So this target is exactly the same as the first one I created. However, the subfolder that I'm pushing the files to is a different path in order to capture that data separately. Now I'm going to create two database migration tasks. One will be a full data load of the database, and the second one will be the ongoing replication of those changes. So I'm going to call this one full load task. I'm going to use the replication instance that I set up earlier. The source database is the RDS database, and the target will be raw, and I'm going to migrate existing data. I'm going to leave the task settings as they are, and I'm going to select a schema because I want it to bring in a specific schema from that RDS database. I'm going to leave everything else the same, and I'm going to create that task. So while that's creating, I'm going to go and also create a change data capture task for this same database, because I'm going to go and, as soon as I've created this replication task here, I'm going to go ahead and make some changes to the database. And as you can see here, the migration task is replicate changes, data changes only. So not all the data, I just want the changes that have been made. I'm going to select the same schema, and I'm going to create this task as well. So as you can see now, the full load task is now running, and that is essentially taking a full copy of that database, all the tables, and pushing that directly to S3. And the CDC task is now, that was starting, it's now in ongoing replication mode. So I'm going to go ahead and make some changes to the database to demonstrate how the changes will come through for those, the changes that I make to the database. I've now generated data in using a Lambda function to bring in some change records into that RDS database. So what I want to show you here is in the full load task, you can see in the table statistics that the data has now been loaded as full load rows directly into S3 using that first task. And with the CDC task, which is the change data capture task, which is now in ongoing replication mode, I've used a Lambda function to mimic some changes in the database. And what you can see here in the table statistics is because that's in ongoing replication mode now, it's using, it's effectively bringing in those changes in real time from that database directly into S3 for these two specific tables. And that's essentially how DMS works in terms of using DMS for real-time data integration. The next service I'm going to look at is Amazon Kinesis. So Amazon Kinesis is used for processing data streams in real time. The service we're going to look at is Kinesis Data Firehose. The first thing I'm going to do is create a delivery stream here. I'm going to call this web data. I'm just going to use some random web data that I'm going to generate through a website to show how you can process data in real time. And I'm going to use a direct put, which will go directly to S3. So I'm not going to transform any of the records, but you optionally can transform your records on the fly from using Kinesis going into S3. So if you have JSON format, for example, you could convert that record directly to Parquet and land it in S3 as a Parquet file, which makes it a lot easier than having to then do it later. And that uses AWS Glue to be able to do that. Or optionally, you can do other transformations using Lambda functions. I'm putting this directly into Amazon S3, and I'm going to choose the same bucket that I've been using till now. I'm going to put it into, let's just call it click data dash, and it wants a bucket for any errors. So I'm going to call that click data dash error dash. And the reason why I'm putting the dash at the end is because it will prefix it with the year at the end of that folder. So at the end of the folder name. So I'll put the dash in there. My buffer size will be 1, and the shortest time you can deliver the shortest interval you can select here is 60 seconds. So I'm going to select 60 seconds. You can optionally compress your data when it lands in S3. I'm not going to do that. You can also encrypt it as well. You'll need a role to be able to run this particular, so you need an IAM role. So you have the option here to use an existing role, or you can get it to create or update a role that it has for you. I'm going to review all these details and create delivery stream. So while that's creating, I'm going to go and generate some data that's going to push data through the Kinesis Data Firehose directly into S3 in real time. Now that that's created, that delivery stream, I'm going to go in and have a look. There's a couple of options you can see here. You can go into the monitoring tab, and this is going to give you information about how the files have been processed, the data has been pushed through Kinesis. So as you can see here, I've got a few metrics that have now popped up. Which is giving me some information about the incoming records that have been processed through Kinesis. And as you can see, there's been a 100% success rate in delivery to S3, and it's given me the number of records that has been delivered to S3. The other thing you can do here is you've got Amazon S3 logs, so if there was any errors, you could come in here and have a look at the S3 error logs to see, but I have none. So I'm going to now go into S3 and let's have a look at this data. So in this web folder that we have, I've got the click data dash, as you can see, that was the prefix, and it's added the year to the end of that folder name. So it will partition the data by year, by month, by day, and by hour. And I generated a number of files, but as you can see here, there's 3 files. So if we have a look at one of those files, you can see here, it's generated a bunch of random data for me. It's now being pushed directly in real time into S3. So it's great. So now that I've created all my data sets, I have my data flowing in real time into S3 from using AppFlow, DMS, Database Migration Service, and Kinesis. What I want to do now is I want to actually create a catalog of that data just so that I know exactly what's happening or where that data is coming from. And if I wanted to query that data, then I can use this catalog to query that data in a service like Athena. So first thing I needed to do was create a database, which I've already done. I'm now going to create a crawler. So I'm going to add a crawler. We'll call this demo crawler. You need to give it a name. I'm going to use existing data stores. So I'm going to use S3, and I'm going to crawl my buckets my bucket that I created. And the first one I want to crawl is the contacts data. I'm going to add all my data stores in one go in this particular crawler. I'm not going to add any more data stores. I'm going to choose an existing role. If you didn't have an existing role, that you would have to actually create an IAM role that gives Glue permission to access S3 and the data stores that you are selecting. I'm going to run this on demand, but you can actually run it in a number of ways. You could do it hourly, you could even do a custom cron. For this one, I'm just going to run it on demand. I'm going to use the existing database, and I'm going to prefix this with raw underscore, so I know that this is just raw data coming in and not changed data. Review all those and finish. And I'm going to run it now. So while that's running, I'm actually going to go and create another crawler that will crawl the changed data sets that came in from Salesforce and from RDS. As you can see here, I've created another crawler that will crawl the changed data, and that was the data coming from RDS and also from Salesforce. And as you can see, the first crawler is now finished. It's now created 17 tables. Let's go and have a look at those tables. So if we have a look at those tables now, we can see that there is it's created a schema for a number of these tables. So if we look at just one of them. So this was the contact data that was coming through from Salesforce. And as you can see, it's created it's used the column name that was in the file, and it's created a bunch of data strings for data types, for those particular, based on the columns that it's crawled. And it gives you a bunch of information here about, the amount of data in the files and any and where the information was located. And it's actually a JSON file. So if we look at one of the other ones, and that other crawler that's just finished as well, which is another crawler that I created for the changed data, you can see that that's actually finished and created 3 tables as well. Again, it gives you a bunch of information. It creates a schema. In this particular case, this is the Salesforce changes, and you can see here that it's brought in the changes, then it's brought in petitions for that data set, because that data is petitioned. And because it's a JSON file, it's used a struct data type for that particular file, and because it's a nested JSON file. So what we can use with those tables, now that we have a bunch of tables, we can actually query this data in Athena. So I'm in Athena now, and what you can see here is that when I connect to the data source, it's now connecting to the database that I created, and you can see all these tables available to you in Athena. And I can just query those tables as I would with any standard SQL query. So in this case, I'm just going to run a quick preview of the data for that particular table. I can also, that was a CSV file, and you can see it scanned it, and it scanned the data, and it tells you how long it ran for. I can even query, you can run any standard ANSI SQL query, but I could also even query this petition data that's nested JSON format. I can even query this type of data as well in Athena. And as you can see, that was the 3 records that I changed in Salesforce. You can see the email address and the record ID. And really that's it. And that gives you that opportunity to be able to, in very quick time, to be able to create data flows and bring in real-time data, and then catalog that data and query it using a tool like Athena. And this is our AWS services.
And that concludes my demo for today. I really hope that helps you to understand how you can use AWS services to integrate data in real time. I'd like to thank you for attending my session today. I really hope you enjoyed it and have a lovely day.